Okay, good afternoon. I think it's time we get started today. So my name is Stephanie Worthley, and I'm the K through 12 Guidance Department Chair. And we really appreciate you all joining us today. We realize that some parents, might be joining us during their lunch break today, and we appreciate you taking the time to do so. In years past, we've always offered a program like this prior to the pandemic in the morning. It was a parent coffee, and that was also often well attended and well received. But we realized that sometimes parents couldn't make that in-person event either. So one of the benefits of the pandemic is that we're able to use the technology that we have to reach out to more parents. And although the technology is great, it also makes me very nervous when things don't always work as planned. So bear with us if we run into any Zoom issues. But this video is being recorded today, so we'll share the link later on this afternoon or tomorrow morning once the video is downloaded from the cloud, so all parents have access to the information. So, not that slide, sorry about that. So we have a full agenda for today, and joining me are all of the MHS guidance counselors. So if your son or daughter's last name begins A through BO, they've worked with me over the past few years. Last names BR through E work with Elise DeLuzio. F through K works with Ann Lodge. L through Q works with Amanda Patton, and R to Z, the end of the alphabet, works with Eric Ornberg. Russ Becker, our school adjustment counselor, is joining us today as well. So our goal for today is really to provide you with as much information as we can about post-secondary plans and the college admissions process. So beginning last year, we started to work with students, really starting to think about what they wanted to do and planning for life after high school. So in December, we met with students in groups where we played the GPA game, and we talked a lot about college searches and college visits. We also had our junior parent night last December, which really kicked off the process for parents. In January, we hosted a college admissions panel with college admissions representatives to hear directly from the colleges as we've begun to move forward in this process. In March, we did an advisory activity with students to activate student SCORE accounts with a follow-up presentation in April about how to use SCORE. Toward the end of April, we did another session with students about types of applications, deadlines, recommendations, SCORE, etc. So then at the beginning of this year, just last week, we met with all seniors during advisory and flex to give students information about the nuts and bolts of what needs to be done over the next couple weeks. And that's really what we're going to talk about today. So if you have questions during this presentation, please feel free to use them in the Q&A or the chat feature. We will monitor the questions in the chat during the presentation. Please be sure to include your name in the chat. We might not be able to respond to questions from anonymous participants. So any questions that we might try to answer live during the presentation today, but some we might actually wait till the end as well. So if you feel like for some reason your questions weren't answered and you leave today still having questions, please reach out to your child's guidance counselor. But before we get into our presentation today, I just want to take a minute to talk about the high school rankings and their impact on college admissions. I know that there has been many conversations over the past few weeks when Boston Magazine reported the best high schools in Massachusetts. And there are, of course, many variables that play into such metrics, and Dr. Marsden outlined many of those. And while I definitely understand the concern, I can confidently say, based on numerous discussions with college admissions reps and the years of experience advising students and families on the college admissions process, that the colleges are taking into account many factors when accepting or not accepting prospective students. As previously shared with parents, both friends at Boston College and Holy Cross have assured us that college admissions reps do not look at those ranking lists at all when making their decisions, and their focus is on the student, not the high school where they attend. So currently we are surveying college admissions reps that visit our school this fall to gather a larger sample of colleges and their perspective on high school rankings. And we have the ability to analyze historical data from years past, and the data indicates that our Medfield students, for the most part, are being accepted into and are attending the colleges that they want. As a parent or as a student, you can use SCORE to see historical data around admissions decisions. And the reality is that we have really driven, talented, and highly successful students in Medfield, and our teachers are skilled at preparing them for life after high school academically. So most students report to us that among their peers, they feel very well prepared for academic success in college. But if you have specific questions about admissions data, please use the resources you have available to you and reach out to your child's guidance counselor. Our number one goal is to make sure that all students have a plan for life after high school. So with that said, there are many types of post-secondary options to explore. So each year we are sending close to 90% of students to either 2 or 4-year college. However, you might be listening today thinking that my child is not ready to go to college yet. We have students that sat in our presentation last week that are thinking the same thing. So we are encouraging students to really start to explore their interests and think about what it is they might like to do after high school. We have students that are interested in programs such as a gap year program or trade schools or PG year, different travel and volunteer programs, or students that are really just interested in getting into the workforce. So this is the first time that students have the opportunity to really think about what it is they want to do after high school. So up until this point, we have been always telling students what's next, from, going from Wheelock to Dale Street to Blake to the high school, or, starting in biology and then taking physics and then taking chemistry. They have really followed our lead and our guidelines over the year. And this is the first time that many students have the opportunity to explore their own interests and determine what might be best for them going forward. So today, as we talk about the college admissions process, this process is larger than just the one student themselves. So there are many people that have a role in this process, and which we're going to talk about today. So when you talk about here at school, we have the student really taking the lead through this process and working with you, the parent at home. We are encouraging all of our students to set up appointments with their guidance counselor so we can really work together and talk about what the individual path and plan is for that student. And then we have our teachers who are really helping guide students and write letters of recommendations for students to move on to the next level. So when we talk about the student's responsibility, we've been working with students over the past year or so now on researching schools, going on college visits, and really stressing the importance of creating a balanced list. So the students have been working on that. And I think many students have a general pretty good idea of schools they want to apply to. So one of the things we're really trying to work with our students is to focus on the deadlines and the priorities and the expectations of what they need to do over the next couple of weeks. So one of the first and foremost, we have told students that they need to notify teachers and their guidance counselor of their first college deadline by October 1st. So that does not mean that the student has to have everything done by October 1st, but they need to let us know and the teacher know when their first college deadline is. Many of our students will have maybe an October 15th deadline. Many will have a November 1st deadline, maybe November 15th. So we need to be prepared to be able to get all the school materials out by those deadlines. So therefore, we are asking our students to let us know what their first deadline is by that October 1st. Also, 1 month before their deadline, we're really stressing to students the importance of, if they need to send in SAT or ACT scores to give enough time for those scores to be sent by the deadline. The College Board and the ACT both will offer for an extra fee to be able to rush the scores. There's no need for that if you plan ahead. So again, we're encouraging students 1 month before the deadline to log into College Board or ACT to send scores. And we're going to talk a little more about standardized testing later in our program. But then really for the student, by that college deadline to get your application completed, write the essays, submit the application, pay the application fee, and really work with the counselor and teacher on where school materials need to be sent. So you can expect from your guidance counselor that, we're working to meet with students and families right now to help provide feedback on college lists and really make sure that we're all on the same page as far as deadlines go. We will send, the guidance counselors write letters of recommendations for all of our students, and our responsibility is to send the counselor letter and transcripts right through SCORE. So again, if a student lets us know their first deadline by October 1st, all of the school materials will get sent by the student's deadline. And then the teacher also will write their letter of recommendation. And once they're aware of those deadlines, they can go into SCORE as well and send their teacher letter of recommendation for the student. So not all of these things happen at the same time. If you think of it kind of old school, like a file, once a college receives information, they will put information in the file, and that file won't be reviewed until all the materials are there. So if your student's ready to go and they submit their application, that's great. They send their SAT scores, but maybe the teacher letter isn't there yet, or the counselor and transcript, the counselor letter aren't there yet. That's no problem. As long as things are there by the deadline, the colleges, again, they're going to start a file on your student. And then once everything is there, then they will work through their process to make their decisions. But I told my students that I met with last week, things don't happen instantaneously either. So if you submit your application and the guidance counselor says, yes, I've sent everything, but you don't see it in your portal right away, that's okay. Sometimes it takes maybe a few days or a week to download information from the college's server into their portal before everything shows up as actually there. So as long as the communication is there between the student, the family, the counselor, and the teacher, you'll find that this process pretty much goes smoothly, and we can ensure that everything gets there in a timely fashion. So I'm going to turn the program over to Amanda Patton to continue on.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to take some time to review the different application deadlines that you might come across as you are going through the process. So first deadline I want to talk about is early decision. This deadline is one that's binding, and that means if you apply to a college early and you are accepted, you are obligated to attend that college. I think we just went back to a different slide.
Sorry about that. Oh, we're going the wrong way.
No problem. That's okay.
Sorry. There you go.
No problem. So so early decision is binding. Typically that deadline is in October, November, or December, and you typically hear back by December. Keep in mind that you can only apply to one school early decision because you are making that commitment as you are applying. Elise will demonstrate a little bit later in the presentation how to sign off on the early decision form in SCORE, but be aware that when you decide to apply early decision, there is an early decision form that the student, the parent, and the guidance counselor has to sign off on, and that lets the college know that everyone's on the same page, that this is a binding decision that they're all making together. So when the student indicates early decision in SCORE or in Common App, they will get notified to sign off on that form electronically. And they will also have to enter a parent's email address. They will be prompted to do this in both SCORE and Common App. And then the parent should receive an email with a link where they can sign on to that link and sign off on the form electronically. So Elise will demonstrate this in SCORE in a little bit, but I just that all are aware that this is a form that everyone needs to sign off on. Early action is the next deadline. So this is applying early, typically with deadlines in October, November, or December, but it's non-binding. So you can apply to more than one college early action. You typically hear back in December, but the nice thing about early action is you don't have to make a commitment to that college either way until May 1st. Some students may decide to apply to a couple colleges early action, hear back in December, see what the result is, and depending on what those admissions decisions are, they may want to apply to a couple of colleges or regular decision, and that's absolutely fine. Regular decision is also non-binding. Typically, those deadlines are in January or February. You typically hear in March or April, and you don't have to make a commitment to May 1st. Some students feel like regular decision is a better fit for them if they feel like they need more time to work on their applications and write their essays. Another nice thing about regular decision is that you are able to send along your term 1 and term 2 senior year grades to colleges. So if you're a student who feels like they maybe didn't do as well earlier on in high school, but they're doing much better, senior year, and they want to be able to send a full semester's worth of grades, that can be a nice option to apply regular decision. And then you may see some rolling deadlines out there. So these are also non-binding. Applications are processed as they're received. Typically, you hear a decision in 2 to 8 weeks. But again, even if you hear back, really early in the fall, you don't need to make a commitment until May 1st. So these are some deadlines that you may come across throughout the process. Creating a balanced list. So as students are creating their list and checking in with counselors, we're providing feedback on whether or not their list is balanced. But there are some resources accessible to students and parents to kind of make that determination on your own as well. So a reach college is when the student's GPA and SAT or ACT score are below the average for that college. A fit or a match score is when your GPA or SAT, ACT score are within the average for that college. And then a likely or safety school is when your GPA or and SAT, ACT score are above the average for that college. In general, as you're making your list, I always encourage students to make sure that the majority of colleges on their list are in that match category. Ideally, these are going to be colleges that are going to be a good fit for them academically, so they feel like they can be successful. At the same time, we fully support students applying to a reach college or two. That's absolutely fine as long as they have some match colleges and at least 1 or 2 likely or safety schools on their list as well. In SCORE, when you look up a college, you also have access to these scatograms, which you can see a screen of here. So the dots that are green are Medfield students who applied to this specific college and were admitted. The red triangles, they were not accepted. Blue circles, waitlisted. Yellow circle, deferred. So when you're looking up a college like this one, you can see the student is the star in the green area. So this would be an example of a college that for this student is in that match range or maybe likely range because they're all, they're surrounded by those green dots. I do like to tell students and families when they're looking at the test scores on this graph, because so many colleges did become test optional, kind of take the average test score here with a grain of salt because we aren't able to necessarily see which of these applicants sent their SAT or ACT scores since so many colleges are test optional. But a good thing to check out is the average SAT or ACT for the college on their specific website. There should be language on there about the most updated averages, and that will help you determine whether or not you want to send your scores. Ann Lodge will talk about that in a little bit. But I do think it's good to look at this visual for all the schools on your list and determine the likelihood of admission. And the last thing I'll review is college visits. So we're really excited to have a lot of different college reps visiting MHS this fall. We currently have 82 colleges registered to visit us. They are coming here during flex period or sometimes after school. So in the weekly news flash that's sent out on Monday, you'll be able to see which colleges are visiting that week. But another great way for students to take a look is to use their SCORE account. So on this visual on the top right-hand side, there's 3 little lines. If you click on that and then click on events and deadlines, you'll be able to see all of the different colleges that are signed up and when they're coming to visit. And you can click on that register button and sign up directly through SCORE. After you do that, students can go into their MyFlex Learning and sign themselves in to come to guidance during that time. So I definitely encourage students to take a look at this and come down and meet the reps for any college that they are planning to apply to. And then the last thing to remember as well in terms of college visits and meeting with reps is that seniors have 3 excused absences that they can use to visit colleges throughout the year. So they should fill out the college visit form ahead of time. They can find this form in their class of 2023 Google Classroom. It's also in the guidance office and in the main office. So essentially they'll want to pick this up and get it signed by somebody from the admissions office on their visit so that their absence can be excused as a college visit. So remember that you have that resource as well. I'm going to turn it over to Ann Lodge to talk a little bit more about standardized testing.
Thanks, Amanda. So I wanted to just share a little bit of information about the standardized testing in the admission process. So I think you probably all know that over the past several years, there have been a lot of colleges who have reconsidered the role that standardized testing plays in the admission process. And it has gone from being considered at most colleges across the United States to almost no colleges during the pandemic, and things are evening out a little bit at this point, several years out, although many colleges have shifted their policies, at least for this coming year and possibly for additional years as well. We are still at a point where we're recommending students who have the opportunity to do so take at least one SAT or ACT at some point during the admission process in the event that they are applying to schools that do still require standardized testing to be used as part of the admissions process. For those students who might still have a couple of tests that they might want to take at some point in senior year before submitting applications, the College Board that runs the ACT does have its late registration deadline for the October 1st SAT tomorrow. So if your child is someone who is still looking to take that October 1st SAT and has not yet registered, I would encourage you to hop on there after this webinar today and sign your child up. There also is a November SAT with an October 7th registration deadline. And then for the ACT, there is an October 22nd ACT, and September 30th is the late registration deadline there. And November 4th is the registration deadline for the December 10th ACT. Many of your sons and daughters who have already taken some form of testing at some point during junior year. So this really is just more pertinent to those who still have a little bit more that they would like to accomplish, perhaps before setting off some scores. Generally, there's a pretty quick turnaround time from SAT and ACT from when students take the test to when the test results are back. It's about 2 weeks for the SAT, and ACT does say that they come back on a rolling basis anywhere between 2 and 8 weeks later. So you can keep those dates in mind a little bit as you're looking at your child's application deadlines and what the last possible time that they might want to take a test would be. Also, there are a number of colleges in this process, in fact, a lot of them, that are still test optional. And the National Center for Fair and Open Testing, or fairtest.org, is a great resource for students and families as they're looking to see what schools are requiring in the testing process. In fact, there are over 1,800 colleges. We can just change slides. There are 1,800 colleges across the United States that are still considering themselves ACT and SAT test optional as part of the admissions process for this year's graduating class. So plenty of schools across the United States are still offering students the opportunity to make a decision as to whether or not they would like to submit their test scores to be considered in the admission process. In addition to that, there's about 80 test-free institutions. So that is a little bit different. And test-free institutions, you might also hear them called test-blind schools. And those are schools who will not consider an applicant's scores, even if they are submitted. They play absolutely no role in the process. There are about, I think, 86 campuses as of September that are included in that test blind or test free grouping, including the UC system and the California State University as some of the larger schools that you may be familiar with. For those schools that are test optional, a lot of them do say it's completely up to the student as to whether or not they choose to submit their scores. Some are looking for additional information to say, you don't have to submit your scores, but we'd like to see scores from other testing, or we would like to see some additional type of information. And Fairtest and colleges' websites should clearly communicate exactly what they are looking for in the process. So a lot of the questions that we get asked as counselors is how students know whether or not to submit their schools. If there are scores, excuse me, if they're applying to schools that are test optional, sometimes it's hard to make that determination as they're looking at their own scores as to whether or not they're going to help their application in the process. Rest assured that if a school is test optional, if your child decides not to submit scores, the other parts of the application just play a little bit of a larger role in the process when colleges are making that admission decision. If they do submit their scores to a test optional school, they will be considered as part of the admission process. So as your child is trying to decide whether or not to send scores or which scores to send, SAT or ACT, I would always encourage them to have a conversation with their guidance counselor, but also to use the college admission websites as a really good guideline to see what the most recent class of admitted students looks like. What is their admission profile? Generally, a good rule of thumb is that if your child's SAT or ACT scores are well within that 50% range of admitted students' scores, that's a good idea for them probably to submit their schools as part of the package as well. There are also some colleges that say they are test optional, but they would strongly recommend that students submit their scores if they're able to do so. And I would follow the college's guidelines in those instances. If your child's scores are sort of below that 50% of admitted students, or your child really feels strongly that other areas of their application are going to really stand out and help their application, those might be instances where your child chooses not to submit their test scores. And again, this is just a great opportunity for your child and their guidance counselor to connect and to make sure that everyone's on the same page, and we can help you make that final decision as to whether or not to send the scores. There are concordance charts online also for the SAT and ACT for students who are trying to decide if one of their scores is stronger than the other one. And I'm going to turn things over to Elise at this point.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the school documents, the Medfield High documents being sent over to colleges. So if you think back to their responsibilities, the 3-column slide that Stephanie showed you, this would be the piece that falls under the counselor and the teacher's responsibilities. So there are 3 pieces in this category. It's the transcript, the counselor letter, and the teacher letter. And we did fill your child in on these steps when we met last week, but we thought it would be helpful to review it with all of you just so you're in the loop as well. We do have a deadline of October 1st for making these requests for students.
So Elise, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and give this power over to you.
Perfect. So I'm going to actually pull up SCORE so that I can show everyone what it looks like. Can everyone see that? Perfect. Okay. So when your child logs into their SCORE account, this is the page for those of you that have your parent account as well. You can see which schools your child is following and planning to apply to. So one of the steps for your child to request their transcript and counselor letter is to go into SCORE on this college's top tab to where everything is listed and to drag the colleges to which they know they are applying over into this applying column. So I'm going to show you what that actually looks like. So I just click and drag it here. And when I do that, I get this pop-up, which has me indicate how I'm planning to apply. So I'm going to check off Common App. Right here, we strongly encourage students to find their Common App ID number in their Common App account and enter it here as an additional piece of identifying information for the colleges. And lastly, you'll indicate the application type. So for purposes of this example, I'm going to click early decision so I can show you what the contract, the early decision contract that Amanda Pad mentioned actually looks like. So if I click early decision for this school, I get a pop-up indicating that an agreement is required. And when I click save, it will actually go to the agreement. And as the student, I can then decide whether I want my parent to sign this form electronically, and I can indicate their name and they'll get an email, or I could download and print it the old-fashioned way and submit it to my counselor there. So that's what it looks like when you actually go into SCORE. Let me go out of my screen so we can go back into our slides. The other nice piece within SCORE is, and we have a little screenshot here, when you click on those college tiles, you can also use that as a quick view to find information about the college. And I know Ann Lodge just shared the fairtest.org website, which is a great resource to see which colleges are test optional. You can also take a quick peek at that by clicking within each college on that SCORE tile, and it will show SAT, whether it's optional or required. It will show how many teacher letters of recommendation are required and sort of a quick view of the application requirements. So if we go to the next slide. So every 99% of cases, we as a school are going to send your child documents electronically through SCORE. So this applies even in the cases where there may be a college that is not on the Common App, or if you decide to use a different application. For example, there's an application called Coalition, or some colleges have their own specific application like Georgetown, and they want students to apply directly through their website. So they are not on Common App. So in this circumstance, we as a school most likely will still be sending your daughter or son's transcript, our counselor letter, and their teacher letter through SCORE. However, like with anything, there are occasionally exceptions to this. So while we will still have your child make their request through SCORE, we also want them to just reach out to their counselor and let us know so that we can ensure that their college receives everything that they may need. So a frequently asked question is, how does the timing work out for if I'm applying early and my deadline's November 1st, but my term 1 or quarter 1 report card grades haven't come out yet? What happens? So what happens is that those quarter 1 grades will automatically go out to the colleges to which your child has applied as soon as they become available. And in some cases, the college may already have made their admissions decision or be reviewing if they have a deadline before grades. And in some cases, the college will be looking for those grades and they will add them to your child's file and consider it as part of the application. But they are automatically sent, so there is nothing that you or your child need to do in order to request them. And the same thing happens at the end of quarter 2. When your child's mid-year grades become available, they are automatically sent out to all of the colleges so that they have that information about how senior year is going. And then another question that comes up is that, what if I have a list of, let's say, 8 schools that I'm applying to early action, but then I decide I either found additional schools that I want to apply to, or I want to apply to some regular decision schools. So, we recognize that, your child may have some colleges they know they want to apply to now, but they might still be researching. They may have come across another school that they want to apply to. So in that case, we're requesting that you give us 1 week notice so that we have ample time to ensure we send everything out to the college. And essentially, your child will follow the same steps they did initially to request their counselor letter, transcript, and teacher letter. And that involves updating SCORE and giving their teacher. So most colleges require or accept at least 1 letter of recommendation. So that is what we're calling the primary recommender. Their letter will go out to all of your child's colleges. But if a college accepts or requires more than 1 letter, your child can go into SCORE and indicate that they have a college that they'd like that second letter sent to if they have one. So it gets a little bit confusing, but we did review all of this with your child last week and kind of showed them within SCORE. So I think they are pretty clear on how to do this. And we also have a cheat sheet that I'll show you for reference if it gets confusing in the moment. And we do ask that if they add more schools, again, to just keep the lines of communication open and email their counselor and teacher to let them know. So the last piece of the school document would be the teacher letter of recommendation. And, this is something that most students, we encourage them to ask a teacher before the end of last year for a letter of recommendation. And I think most students have taken this step. And of course, there may be some students that didn't have a chance to do it. So we would encourage them to do it as soon as they can. If they need help figuring out how to ask, we are more than happy to meet with them to talk through that. But we want to make sure that your child has spoken with the teacher to ask if they're willing to write a letter before they actually go into SCORE and send them a request to send a letter out to colleges. So once a teacher has agreed, the student will log into SCORE and add the teacher in there. The teacher will get a notification. And this is really the piece where it tells the teacher where to which colleges and when to send out that letter of recommendation. And again, there's going to be one teacher whose letter will go out to all of the colleges. And then one, if your son or daughter has colleges that accept 2 letters of recommendation, where you can indicate those specific colleges and have that second letter sent there. And this is the cheat sheet I mentioned, because we know there are a lot of steps and it's a lot to take in. This will be coming to your inboxes after this webinar. And this sheet is a summary of all of these request steps. And there are links to the directions that show where to click step by step within SCORE to request everything. So we hope that this will be helpful and be a good guide when your son or daughter goes in to complete all of these steps. And with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Eric Warnberg.
Hi, folks. A lot of information coming at you today. Hopefully we can all take a deep breath and kind of compartmentalize this. But in terms of outside recommenders, many students will have a job, a coach, somebody outside of the Medfield High School system that they would like to have a recommendation letter sent on their behalf. So there's one of 2 ways that you can do this. If it's a Common App school, students can log into their Common App and send an invitation to the recommender to submit there, or actually give the teacher or the person, a coach or a boss, a hard copy of their recommendation letter and have that sent directly to the school. Most college admissions will have an admissions website or email that they do check on a 24-hour basis. We've oftentimes had teachers who've retired or left left Medfield. We've had them send it to those that admissions at admissions.edu email address as well. So if the students have any questions about outside recommenders, we can certainly walk through during a flex period how that looks on the Common App. A couple of other areas to consider as you enter the application process. For the athletes, if you are playing at the Division I or II level, you do have to be cleared by the NCAA. They have to take a peek at your transcript to make sure you passed all the required courses, which is usually not an issue for Medfield students, but it's still something that they have to do. If you are a music or theater student or interested in it, it can be very different. It extends the process. Some students have to actually do an audition before they're accepted, and some schools will have students apply, get accepted, and then do auditions. Ms. Drew in the art wing has been a phenomenal resource for kids that are applying to art schools and helping them with, I think it's called Slide Room, or there is an online application where students can work or submit pieces of their portfolio to art schools. And if your student is on an IEP or a 504, that's much more of a conversation to have with the guidance staff. Oftentimes schools do not want a copy of anything during the admissions process, but afterwards there might be information that's essential to be shared when students have decided and put the down payment on a school and are looking for additional support services at school. A lot of schools will have tremendous support services and others will have some well-meaning tutors and all points in between. But if your student's on a 504 and IEP, we often encourage parents to reach out to the support center and say, how does this transition over to this college or university? And how can I make college more affordable? 3 types of scholarships. There are the local scholarships, which students will hear about more in January. There are state and national scholarships that have deadlines that unfortunately run parallel sometimes to college admissions, but the free application for federal student aid, the CSS profile, those are the types of things in terms of applying for financial aid that have to be done in addition to applying to schools. When it comes to merit-based aid, sometimes the application itself, students will be screened, but usually it's a good idea to have this information taken care of on or around October 1st, specifically the FAFSA and the CSS profile, if the schools require those types of things. And again, the scholarships, the local scholarships will be shared to the seniors. All seniors will be eligible to apply. We try to list, when we're solicited by outside organizations, we try to add these to the MHS website. And, you know, it's never a bad thing to call the financial aid office of the school. A lot of times on the tour, I'm not sure if those visits are included, but it never hurts to ask about the process and protocol when it comes to financial support. And MIFA is probably one of the most underutilized resources for folks in Massachusetts. They offer a ton of webinar series on financial aid. They're very informative. Whenever we have to pick up the phone to support a kid who might be dealing with financing their college on their own, there's been a well-meaning person on the other end of the line that has helped kids and become case managers for them. If you do get a chance to see a webinar or go to an event, it's completely worthwhile as you try to manage the cost of college, especially for folks that might have multiple kids that are attending over the course of the next couple of years. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to our adjustment counselor, Mr. Russ Becker.
Thank you, Eric. So for those who were able to join us at last year's junior parent night, I think you'll recognize that a lot of this is a continuation of the information presented last year. But for those who couldn't join us, I always feel that it's important to point out a couple of things from the mental health lens as you sort of navigate this process. We know that the topic of mental health at college is becoming an increasingly relevant one for many of our students, whether it be for them directly or on behalf of their friends or their roommates. So I highly recommend, as you are going on college tours this upcoming fall, and as they're starting to sort of think about where they might be next year, I feel it's really important to point out what counseling services exist on campus, where they are, how to access them, what they look like, and how your child can be involved. In all likelihood, your child's going to roll their eyes. Perhaps they won't think that they'll need it. But again, what we know is that it's really much better for your child to know what these services are and how to access them and not need it, as opposed to the inverse. In addition to that, due to the major uptick in need over the past couple of years, many of colleges and universities have put limitations on how many times a student can see a mental health professional under the purview of a college. This isn't for everyone, but for many schools, they put a limit on 3 times a semester, 4 times a year. There are even colleges that I've heard of that are putting limitations on 8 times throughout the entire 4 years of your child's college experience. For many students, that might be more than they would need, and it's nice to have a check-in or to at the very least know that they have 8 sessions or whatever the case may be, should they need it. But for many of our students, if you point that out, they will immediately know that is not going to be nearly enough. And so if that is the case, it's worth discussing what other supports might exist for them in that area, or what supports they can bring with them from home. So in addition to that, since the pandemic, one of the benefits of therapy is that most providers have gone digital. Or at the very least, they're able to provide Zoom calls and telehealth therapy. The problem is many of the laws have not been updated in tandem with the current availability. So some therapists have run into issues where, technically speaking, they don't have reciprocity to give therapy if their client is in a different state. At this point, I believe many therapists have sort of figured out how to navigate that process. But if your child has a therapist that they have a great relationship with, and they intend to sort of bring that relationship with them to the next level, it's simply worth a conversation at some point over the next year just to see if that's a viable option, and if it's not, what other options might exist for them. The last thing that I'll mention too is that by the time that this is a reality for your child, 99% of your sons and daughters will be 18 at that point in time. Perhaps that doesn't mean anything, but I think it's well worth a conversation between you and your child to just discuss what their mental health relationship looks like with you at that point in time. Whether it be the confidentiality piece, whether it be navigating how to find a therapist. When your child is 18, they have the ability to be far more autonomous with their own care, with their mental health, and with the supports that they are accessing. Many children still decide to share that responsibility with their parent. Many children are still very open and honest. However, it's probably worth the conversation prior to the fact, just so you're not completely in the dark, and just so you know that there are specific guidelines and sort of boundaries that you can set prior to setting your child up at the next level. At this point in time, if I am not mistaken, I think we are going to open it up for a little more questions. I know many have been answered in the chat already, but if you have any more, please feel free to type them into the chat. And if there are any other questions that you would like to contact me or any of us directly, please feel free to do so.
Thanks, Russ. So as Russ just mentioned, please feel free to drop some questions in the Q&A or the chat. I know, being that I share my screen through this and click through the slides, I can't always see the questions, but I know that the counselors have been answering them. And if you are there, if there are any questions that you feel like might be worth sharing with the whole group, because oftentimes if one parent has a question, there's somebody else who has the same question and is wondering the same thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, there were some great questions in here. So just to review a couple that I would suspect that more than one of you is wondering about. One of the questions was asking about early decision applications, and if a student applies to an early decision school with a November deadline, can they also apply to a college later on in the process with an early decision application? So that depends a little bit. I mean, the general rule of thumb is if you're applying to an early decision school and your child is admitted, they are bound to attend. You sign a contract, your child signs a contract, and we do as well. That said, if your child applies to a college with the November early decision deadline and is not admitted, or perhaps is deferred to a regular decision round, that contract is then broken at that point. Your child is not bound to attend if they are admitted in the regular decision rounds, or perhaps they've been let go in the early rounds. At that point, your child can submit an early decision application to a different institution. And you'll find that there are even some colleges that offer early decision 1 and early decision 2 deadlines to allow for students to apply early decision a little bit later in the process, perhaps because they've fallen in love with the college later in the process, or perhaps in situations like this, if they've been released from an early decision contract with a different school earlier on. Another question, just in terms of what are the admission decisions that might come from early action or early decision applications. This does vary a little bit from school to school. However, in general, most colleges have 3 different choices. If your child is applying early decision or early action at a school, obviously best case scenario is that your child will be admitted to that institution. In some cases, your child might be deferred to the regular decision round, and that might be because they want to see your child in the context of a larger applicant pool, or perhaps they want to see a particular grade in a course come up if they thought maybe term 1 didn't go as well and they'd like to see a stronger grade later on in the process. Or maybe they're looking at data from junior year and sophomore and freshman year and saying, wow, this child really sort of ramped up the rigor in their curriculum senior year. We want to see how they continue to do throughout the course of the year. They might defer your child to the regular decision round. Or worst case scenario, your child might be denied early in the process if the college really doesn't feel like they're going to be a strong applicant in their regular decision pool. They might cut ties early on in the process to allow your child the opportunity to set their sights on different institutions. So those are some great questions. There was another question about the scattergrams on SCORE and whether or not they allow you to account for test optional when you're looking at those scattergrams. And at this point, unfortunately, they do not. SCORE uses your students' grade point average and the test scores, if they've taken any tests that are housed in SCORE, and their admission decisions, and generates the scattergrams from that data. It's a great jumping off point to see if your child might be admissible as a candidate to a particular institution, but it's certainly not an end all be all. And we would always recommend that your child look to the college's admission website as well for more specific data on the most recent class and their admissions statistics, which students were admitted, the percentage of students that submitted scores in the process, and what that 50% of admitted students actually looked like from a grade point average and a standardized testing perspective. Let's see, there might be one or two more that probably would be good to share with everyone. Oh, we did get quite a few questions from parents wondering how parents might have access to their SCORE accounts. So this is something that we did encourage all students when they signed up last spring. We encouraged them to invite a parent if they wanted to do that, and that was part of the family conversation, to invite a parent through SCORE. They can input your email address and you will receive an email invitation from SCORE to participate in the process and be able to see some of the material, most of the material that your child can see as well. I would encourage you to have those conversations with your child at home. If for whatever reason they haven't done that, can't figure out how to do it, definitely get in touch with us and we can help support you in that process as well. I think it looks like there might be a couple other questions that are coming in. Let me just take a quick look at those. Another question about ED and EA. Can a student apply early decision to one school and simultaneously apply early action to another school? And for most colleges, that answer is yes. There are some colleges that have EA policies that are a little bit more unique, and they consider themselves a restrictive early action school. So they would not allow students to apply early decision to an institution and early action to their institution. But for the most part, the majority of schools that offer ED and EA, students can apply to both. I would always recommend that you read the fine print on each college's admission webpage to get the details for what they require and what they allow within their institution.
Thanks, Anne, for looking through the Q&A and the questions. So I want everybody to leave with this today. If you have questions, please reach out to your son or daughter's guidance counselor. That's what we're here for right now. We are more than happy to help answer your questions, even if you think it's a small question or a big question. You know, we really want to help support our students through this process, and you as parents. I know it can often be a little bit of a stressful time for families at home. And if there's any way that we can help kind of ease that anxiety, or really help our students kind of make their plans for the next steps in their life, that's what we're here for. So please reach out with any questions. Thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time. And again, we'll share the link to this presentation a little later today with some supporting documents. So thank you very much. And we look forward to talking with you soon.